for this presentation. Today Kaisha will be discussing emotional artificial intelligence, and a few possible implications of its commercial use. As a part of this presentation, Kaisha has chosen for me, Jess Thomas, one of many unique voices from the AI voice-over text-to-speech platform, Lovo, to verbally present her presentation script as one of many examples of emotional AI's uses. I apologize if my voice becomes a bore, although, Kaisha is sure her voice wouldn't be much more interesting than mine anyway. Okay, let's begin. So, what is this form of AI? Well, emotional AI refers to technologies that use effective computing and artificial intelligence to sense, learn about, and interact with human emotional life. Essentially, this is technology that can know how you feel, or, like me, can seem human. From input to output, most basically explained, would involve data collection of the given technology's surroundings, including any human life. Then data processing, which is when the AI establishes and categorizes the collected data. And finally, data manipulation and display, which is where the technology produces an interactive response in consideration of previous data collected. I'll continue to elaborate on this in a few slides. Now, the background of emotional AI began in the 1960s, when the investigation of real possibilities of EAI started with Herbert Simon's paper on motivational and emotional controls of cognition. This was in response to Ulrich Neisser, also referred to as the father of cognitive psychology, as he argued, the view that machines will think as man reveals misunderstanding of human thought. Although, as shown in Simon's paper, shows how motivational and emotional controls over cognition can be incorporated into an information processing system so that thinking will take place in intimate association with emotions and feelings. This specifically references 2 out of 3 of Neisser's fundamental and interrelated characteristics of human thought, being that, 1. Human thinking begins in an intimate association with emotions and feelings which is never entirely lost, and 2. Almost all human activity, including thinking, serves not one but a multiplicity of motives at the same time. Then, a few years later, Carl Hermann Hjortzjo proposed the first measurement system based on the facial muscles associated with different expressions, which was called the facial action coding system. Since this had inspired Paul Ekman's work in the study of emotions and their relation to facial expressions. In turn, Ekman and his team developed an objective coding system called the facial affect scoring technique to measure emotion categories such as happiness, anger, sadness, etc., then emotion dimensions such as pleasantness, unpleasantness, and so on. The key difference between Hjortzjo and Ekman's work is that the facial action coding system taxonomizes facial expressions in relation to the emotions felt while naturally performing expressions. While the facial affect scoring technique aimed to be used with both photography and film to accurately predict the judgments of the specific emotions shown through naturally performed expressions. And last but definitely not least, all previous work discussed has contributed to the work of many, but in particular, Rosalind Picard. Having firmly established effective computing, from her 1997 book on the subject, to current projects that have pioneered many new technologies, Picard's focus within this field has led her to smartphones and wearables to measure and communicate emotion using face, voice, physiology, and combinations of behaviors. To give an understanding of exactly how this technology works, I'll first break down the relation of AI to effective computing. As you may already know, AI is a broad area of computer science that is the scripted simulation of human and animal intelligence processed by machines. This basically enables machines with AI to retain and process huge amounts of data at a rate much faster than any human learn due to pattern recognition and reason, based on previous pattern recognition and task-orientated programming. Although, when AI attempts to socially interact with humans, it is unable to do so in response to emotional behavior. An example of how rationally programmed AI responds to the irrationality of human emotional behavior can be seen depicted through this sketch of Google's driverless car, on the right. Now, using an example presented by Jesse Hoey, a professor at the University of Waterloo with a research focus on decision theoretic planning in real-world domains, will explain how despite such huge achievements in AI, this technology still lacks key characteristics, or shall we say, functions, that would enable it to understand and engage with humans more intimately.
What they essentially lack is any kind of idea of empathy or culture, emotion, or altruism. So they don't have a way of kind of interpreting what other agents are, how other agents are handling the situation as team members, as a social group. And there has been some efforts to make this happen. So let's try to put some emotional behaviors into our robots. So here's this guy he's happy, and now he's not so happy. Maybe he let in a goal or something like that. But of course, these are just purely scripted behaviors, right? This robot has no idea what this means to any other robot. And in fact, no other robot has any other way of interpreting these signals, okay? And if you look at humans when they play games together, you see this vast array of emotions going on. So this is a short clip from this is the Barca junior team that just beat this Korean team. And you can see this incredible array of emotions going on and different cultural signals that they're sending to each other. Like this guy is using the face slap, which must be some kind of Spanish, expression of empathy.
So, as a subset of AI and an interdisciplinary field spanning computer science, psychology, and cognitive science, as you may have understood from the previous example, that effective computing refers to a computer's abilities to recognize users' emotional states, mimic these interpreted states to express its own emotions, and to respond to the user's emotions, like a human would. With visual reference of this on the left, shows which process each stage of computation is focused on. Beginning with data collection of everything acknowledged in the surroundings of the given technology, will then continue into data processing of establishing data which will determine the most rational way to react or engage. If the AI of the technology is programmed using effective computing, will also modify its rational reasoning AI with fundamental sentiments to enable it to respond in an appropriate emotional manner. As a side note, sentiments refer to the culturally shared, fundamental meanings that people associate with particular social labels. Then, from the occurring social actions prompted by shared fundamental sentiments, creates transient impressions. These are essentially how people feel about situations in context, as social interactions actually unfold, extending from fundamental sentiments. Now, thinking back to the sketch of Google's driverless car, maybe if it was able to produce its own transient impressions, would not be so stuck when faced with unpredictable human behaviors. Although, as emotions can be incredibly subjective, like with sarcasm for example, AI's accuracy to produce its own calculated transient impressions is still proving to be very difficult. However, as technology has already made it this far, shows that it is only a matter of time, resources, and willpower until this is made possible. Who knows? Perhaps this could be the frontier of synthetic consciousness. Data sources for EAI include natural language processing, to transform spoken language into a machine-readable format of the fundamental types of words, such as nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Sentiment analysis, that focuses on identifying positive and negative sentiments in text. And honest signaling, to monitor the energy in a voice, pitch levels, pauses, and melodic patterns of utterances. Sources also extend to video too, with facial analysis, gait analysis, which is the observation of movement, and physiological signals, that observe heart rate, respiration rate, skin temperature, skin conductivity, and electrocardiogram that measures the heart's electrical activity. Or, depending on how personal businesses, engineers, and scientists want their technology to be, can include everything previously listed and more. Which, as previously highlighted, provides these technologies with the ability to respond in a way that seems more seamless, personalized, and emotional, despite their mechanical forms. While EAI is literally being used in all industries, from defense to education and entertainment, I'll just discuss a few examples to demonstrate each data source from the previous slide. So, for brands and social media monitoring, using sentiment analysis also regarding the volume, individual and overall quality of people's expressed sentiments, enables businesses to use any kind of public forum on the internet to closely predict how customers feel about certain topics, products, or services. Regarding honest signaling, using the company Cogito as an example, they enable call center environments to measure how well a conversation is going while it's happening, and then provides real-time, AI-driven coaching to phone professionals, which results in instant measurements of customer perception, and novel business insights, basically guiding the phone professional on the best service tailored to the customer at the time. Skylar Place, the lead of behavioral science at Cogito, said that they have about 200 different signals they utilize to recognize different behaviors. Then links the behaviors to the outcomes that are valuable for call center calls. He then goes on to say, "That's how we think about emotion, less about pure recognition, more about understanding the behaviors that allow you to not just measure, but influence, the emotions in an interaction." Although, while this software is said to be incredibly effective for such businesses, also prompts emotive tactics to increase the likelihood of sales, which is misleading to customers when it seems the phone professionals have the customer's best interest at heart, when really it is in the interest of sales. Additionally, regarding the use of people's audible data, Vice reported Microsoft contractors admitting to listening to people's conversations between 2014 and 2016. This was done through customers' Xbox Connects, as well as some Skype calls via the app's translation function. Their reasoning for doing so was to, as follows: improve their voice command services, with further justification that strong privacy protections are in place and will continue this commitment. Then, after confrontation of this, Microsoft updated its privacy documents to more explicitly say their processing of personal data for these purposes includes both automated and manual, human, methods of processing. However, despite this, contractors reported that they were encouraged not to tell others, for which company and what they did for their work, suggesting suspicion of data being used for more than to simply refine the voice command services. Then leading into the use of biometric data, is focused heavily on security and health, although is not exclusive to these industries. As of 2019, live facial recognition systems have become a dominant part of life in China, which has since been used as a means to identify people by indexing them by information such as criminal history, physical features, and even ethnicity. However, London, being at the forefront of democratic societies in its testing of this technology, has come to find in recent years that its risks outweigh the benefits, as it isn't very accurate, namely, recent testing in London Stratford, with accuracy in just 19% of their cases. This is due to the dataset the algorithms are trained on, not being as robust for people of color and women, as it is with white men. And a lack of definition and transparency of the legal basis of live facial recognition of the general public, and for when blanket use of the technology is justified. McStay's 2020 research on emotional AI highlighted how the broader business strategy for emotional AI companies is wide usage of automated emotion detection in all personal, commercial, and public contexts. But, given that a quintessential attribute of dignity and humanity is physical, mental, and experientially self-determined. As emotion tracking emerges, a broader dignity-based understanding to questions of commercial power and data privacy is required. Also highlighting that privacy is not only an individual right, but a group right as it is a collective good. A dignity-based understanding diagnoses the problems with passive profiling and using big data techniques about emotions for unconscious influence. It is about recognizing that phenomenological experience is important, innately worthy, and should not be appropriated because personal, sensitive, and intimate information plays a constitutive role of who we are. An example given by Wojciechowski featured in McStay's research is that turning the human face into another object for measurement and categorization by automated processes, controlled by powerful companies and governments, touches the right to human dignity. This rings similarly with Kathleen Richardson's argument against sex robots, i.e., turning the human form into another object to measure and categorize people, however, based on the purpose of commercial power of data regarding governing control, business competition, and consumers. So, results in different demographics of people being targeted for different things for commercial uses, which, depending on the outcomes of people's data, will also determine what is marketed to them. Yes, like Microsoft stated on a previous slide, to improve services. But also, as Gus Hussain of Privacy International noted in an interview, can easily be used for subtle manipulation, due to the nature of emotional AI to seamlessly connect with people's emotions. Also, with not yet having the legal frameworks regarding emotional AI data, produces greater opportunity for companies and governments to deceive the public and abuse their power over their customers and citizens, for profit and social control. Likewise, when McStay interviewed all emotional AI industry stakeholders with commercial interests, he found that they recognized privacy as a concern and recommended opt-in processes of consent as a primary privacy tool, because, while this is the dignity-enhancing thing to do, it is primarily in the self-interest of presenting an image of consideration of the customer, which ultimately sustains profit. Although, if vague statements are put out, such as Microsoft saying, "Strong privacy protections are in place and we will continue this commitment," only leaves customers down to assumption and hoping for the best, that their data will not be abused and that the product should be as described. Rosalind Picard in MIT Review explains that today, customers are still not that well educated about the abilities of this technology and how it is used by businesses. Also, that customers should not be required to be well educated in order to trust a product. Lastly, while the EU is planning strict rules against misuse of all emotional AI, and that fines for large tech companies could amount to billions, there are still loose definitions like high risk, which is said to be unhelpfully vague. However, should be clear throughout the 2020s.